is green, then you can talk. It's not rocket science, but with the live and stuff, we'll get.
So, I would like to thank you for this panel. You all accepted almost immediately. I found out that emails are not working anymore, that LinkedIn is much more effective, which is fine. I'd like specifically to thank people from the industry. This is Julien, Omar, and Dan, and also Tomas from DEFIS. It's the second representative from DEFIS that we have today. And my most appreciated colleague, Mickaël. We have been doing things together on entrepreneurship and innovation since quite a while. And I just discovered that we discuss almost every week, which is pretty rare. And so, I'll let the floor to Chloe. Just to inform you, you have cams, you are recorded and streamed. So it's not just to avoid suicidal comportment. But this will be uploaded on the UNIVERSEH YouTube channel. And in general, we get from 1,000 to 1,500 views. And it takes a bit of time, but then generally speaking up because we are able to have very smart people for the panels. Even if there is not so many people in the room, they are getting on YouTube, which is apparently the most effective solution. So thank you again for coming for UNIVERSEH and University of Luxembourg.
Thank you very much, Eric, and welcome back, everyone. I hope the coffee break was good because we're on for a second panel of about an hour and 15 minutes, right before lunchtime, to talk this time about space entrepreneurship in more detail. So we touched upon space health policy with people from academia, from institutions, and right now we have also people from the industry, as well as one person from academia and one person from an institution, to talk more into space entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship is reshaping how we reach orbit, communicate, and explore, and especially in Europe, and how can we lead in this fast-moving new space era. So as before, feel free to scan again the QR code that is appearing behind me, as we will also have some polls and Q&A at the end of the panel. So there can be interaction for the people in the room, but as well for the people that are watching us online. So to introduce them to you in order, we have Tomas, HALASKA, CASSINI Policy Coordinator from DG DEFIS, an EU-level expert on space innovation policy and funding. Thank you so much for being here with us. Then we have Jan DENTLER, R&D Manager at Redwire Space Luxembourg, leading the company's technology roadmap and software development for space robotics. Thank you. Then we have Omar, the founder and CEO of OQTechnology, a leading company deploying a global 5G NB-IoT satellite constellation with 10 satellites in orbit and more on the way. And then we have Mickaël, GERAUDEL, Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship here at the University of Luxembourg, specialist in space entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystems. Thank you for having us here. And finally, last but not least, we have Julien, LAMAMY, CEO of iSpace Europe, leader in lunar missions and commercial space services. Thank you all for joining us. To kick off this panel, as we did with the last one, we actually want to get some input from the audience. So this is going to be the first question that we want to ask you and kind of a kickstart the conversation. Where do you see the strongest opportunity in Europe's space sector today? Is it in launch and upstream manufacturing, downstream services and data applications, entrepreneurial ecosystem and startups, talent development and educational initiatives, public-private partnerships, or sustainability and dual-use innovation? Where do you see the strongest opportunity for Europe? And I want to ask as well at the same time our panelists, maybe Julien, if you want to start, what do you see Europe's strongest opportunity? It can be one of the potential things above, or it can be of your own choosing.
My opinion would be in downstream services and data applications. Just to react on the previous panel, I think we touched upon the launch aspect being maybe a bottleneck for Europe. And there was a mention that speed is maybe not that important. I think for the people in this room, maybe for Omar in particular, I think speed is essential. You know, because the competition is global, and that's why I would vote for that category.
Thank you. How about you, Mickaël? Where do you see strongest momentum for Europe?
Yes, I agree with my colleague. It's not really capital intensive. So for a startup that don't have so much money, going to these downstream services could be a good opportunity, actually.
Okay. What do you think, Omar?
I think, as you said, that downstream is important, but at the same time, I'm surprised for entrepreneurial ecosystems. There's no vote, because I think in Europe we do need a much stronger support for entrepreneurs and startups, because this is where you have new innovation. This is where you can move faster. And although a lot of work is done here, but I think there's still work to be done. You know, you see how entrepreneurship within countries like the US, like in Asia, Singapore, Japan, Israel, and so on. And I think Europe still has to do a lot in this aspect, because they can move faster, they can bring new ideas, and you create and you encourage other people also to innovate and think out of the box.
Yeah, we will touch upon those topics afterwards in the panel discussion. Jan, how about you?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about what's the opportunity in terms of what is it's something that we are good at, then I would say it's definitely education. I think we have really a lot of high-tech engineers that develop really the newest state-of-the-art tech, and then somehow this tech is bought up by other countries. So I think that's also one of the challenges that we're facing, the consecutive investments throughout the growth phase of companies. I think that was already mentioned as well. And I think, yeah, the opportunities also that, of course, we have a lot of different entities, different countries, but it also means a lot of different ideas and collaboration, and we're used to collaborate. I think that's an opportunity as well, that we're fairly open with our markets as well, in comparison, for example, to the US. And I think what we need to think about is on how we can create value, not for Europe, but in general for the world. And I think that's kind of like what is still not happening. I think we're still focusing on regaining the infrastructure that we were losing over the last few decades because of low investments into those kind of space infrastructures.
Thank you. And Thomas?
I would maybe say that it's actually the whole global space economy, because as we know, the space economy is not only the space sector itself, but also all other sectors where space plays an important role. Those sectors are actually enabled by space, such as agriculture, defense, etc. And when we have a look at the numbers, in 2023, the global space economy was worth nearly 600 billion euro, but is expected to grow up to 1.6 trillion in 2035. So this is almost 3 times higher than these days, and this is a really big opportunity for European space sector to grasp this opportunity, to fill this emerging gap. And even when we look at the slide, we see the downstream services and data applications, which indeed is the part that can play a huge role and really try to offer more services and more services that are based on the space technologies and data. We also see the sustainability and dual use. Indeed, dual use, it's space for defense, defense for space. We see that defense is becoming a bigger market for space as well. So that's indeed indispensable part. And indeed, to make all this happen, we need the talent development and education initiatives. Because we may have the companies, but if the companies are unable to have the skilled workforce, they will not be able to develop further and to use this whole opportunity.
Perfect transition, because actually the first theme for the panel is going to be growth and market development and how Europe's space economy is growing. Where does that growth come from, and how can we help maybe our companies bridge the gap between early innovation and market-ready ideas? To kick off this theme, a second question we wanted to ask you, and we've touched upon very briefly in the other panel is, what's the biggest challenge for Europe's new space growth? Is it access to capital? Is it market maturity, regulation, or risk appetite? I think we've touched upon that with some of the policymakers we had at the previous panel, notably on risk appetite and access to capital. But what do we think here in the audience? We have few regulation, capital, risk, appetite. So I want to ask the first question to you, Thomas. What are the Commission's main priorities in the supporting of the development of the space economy with respect to those challenges?
Well, in the European Commission, indeed, one of the biggest priorities is competitiveness. So the main goal is to raise competitiveness of Europe, and based on this, the Commission adopted a communication called A Vision for the European Space Economy, where the ultimate goal is to position Europe as a leader in the global space economy by 2050. So indeed, as I mentioned before, it's really important for us to grasp the opportunity, how it will grow, and to make sure that Europe is going to get a part of this growing global market. In this vision, we have multiple building blocks on which we're trying to build actually this goal. One of them is, for instance, creating the single market for space, which you also tackled in the previous panel, that we need to make sure that companies can seamlessly operate across the whole European Union. It's accelerating research and innovation, which is indeed the backbone of a thriving company that can develop and innovate further. It's also the industrial readiness and smaller dependence on external supply chains. So that's something we need to focus on as well. It's also the space commercialization. So we need to make sure that European companies, with all the technologies, developments, and solutions they have, they are able to sell it further. So they are not, for instance, only dependent on institutions as the anchor customer, but also have the balanced approach with the private customers as well. Then it's indeed the international cooperation and economic diplomacy, because indeed European space market is significant, but we also have significant markets in North America, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and we also need to help companies to, let's say, penetrate those markets. And lastly, as I mentioned also before, the skilled workforce is the transversal aspect of this, because without the sufficient skilled workforce, we will not be able to make all these things happen. So I would say that the vision is these days really the main document that we are trying to implement, and with the objectives. Indeed, it also tackles, for example, the capital. Already now in CASSINI, we have something called Growth Investment Facility. And with this, we are putting together around €1 billion in investment. We cooperate together with InvestEU, with the European Investment Fund. And then we invest into venture capital funds. These venture capital funds receive between 10 and 60 million euro. And then they are consequently investing into space companies. As of today, they have conducted more than 60 investments. And this is also the way how we're trying to actually mobilize the investing capital across Europe, but also make the investors willing to take some risk. Because indeed, when they see that maybe the EU has already invested in some VC fund, it may become a good incentive for them to join the forces and to invest further.
And you've talked about CASSINI in your introduction. Can you maybe tell us in more detail? And do you consider CASSINI successful?
Indeed, so CASSINI is a Commission's space entrepreneurship initiative that we have launched in 2021. And the main goal of this initiative is to support space entrepreneurs, startups, and SMEs. We have multiple ways how to do that. We have, for example, CASSINI hackathons and mentoring that targets mainly the younger audience to spark interest in space. They can come to hackathons, they can hack some ideas. We have always some topics, let's say space for healthcare, space for water, but also space for security and defense. Then we also have CASSINI challenges. There we target ideas, prototypes, and products. So people can showcase their solutions, and then they can be awarded some prizes, which also helps them actually to maybe proceed with whatever solution they may have. Then we have CASSINI Matchmaking. That's a platform where we have more than 300 European startups and SMEs. And what we try to do there is to provide them a platform how they can present themselves to potential investors and customers. So our ultimate goal is really to match them with those so that they can grow their business, secure contracts or investments. And this we do through events that we attend. We go at least to 10 events a year across Europe where we invite the companies and allow them free of charge to participate and present themselves. Then we also have CASSINI Business Accelerator. That's already for a slightly mature startups that have the market on the place. And we provide them with 6 months of mentoring. They can consult with experts their business obstacles, how they can overcome them. And they also leave with a 75,000 euro seed voucher. So they also get some this sort of funding from this perspective. We also have the CASSINI Growth Investment Facility. So as I said, we invest through EIF and VC funds. And we also have our investors network. And we also try to invite these investors to those events where we invite our CASSINI companies. We give them the opportunity to do the pitching session, which indeed could attract, again, customers or potential investors to launch any collaboration.
Thank you. So Julien, you're one of those entrepreneurs in Europe. You're the CEO of iSpace, and you're providing lunar tech and infrastructure. How do we see Europe's role in the emerging cislunar economy, let's say, and what conditions do you need to grow globally with your venture?
So I think we're maybe a special case because, you know, to answer this poll and answer your question at the same time, we're a subsidiary of a Japanese company. And our mother company, headquartered in Tokyo, raised a lot of venture capital and then went listed. And I don't think that path would have been possible in Europe due to a lot of the factors that are listed here. I think, I'm not an expert, but I think the lack of capital is a symptom of everything else, regulation and risk appetite. I think there's a mindset which is not, you know, appreciative of the entrepreneurship mindset and risk-taking, and also I'm guessing that for venture capital and have a choice between a European startup and their competitor in the US, you know, regulation comes into play. You know, which one's going to get the fastest to market, and you know, take that share. To be a bit blunt and stereotypical, I think the US one has a much higher chance of doing that. So I think the lack of capital for European startups is a consequence or symptom of, you know, all those other factors. That said, you know, iSpace, when there were just 25 employees in Tokyo, decided to open an office in Luxembourg. So that's a very positive sign. I think there's a lot of Japanese companies actually that have done so, gone global. And in the case of iSpace, it's thanks to the very bold step that Luxembourg took in 2016 with their Space Resources Initiative. And I think that's a very good example of, you know, in the large grand scheme of things, it wasn't a big budget that I think Luxembourg put forward, but they had a budget, they had a very bold positioning on space resources, even though I think the strategy was maybe more about the new space sector, really, you know, being the first country in Europe to have a new space sector, you know, they went N+1 and say it's new space and space resources. So a very good PR move, because you know, Luxembourg got the attention of everybody who's interested in space by doing something that bold, that early, with money on the table. And then now, you know, the ecosystem is much bigger a few years later than it was in 2016. So I think Luxembourg should serve as a role model for, you know, maybe Europe as a whole, or, you know, other nations that are interested in doing this. And what you get, if I may say, with iSpace as an example, is you don't have to put out the, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to create a lunar company with the very asset-heavy, you know, investments you need to do for lunar landers. You get a subsidiary for a much smaller investment, but then you diversify your portfolio of companies, of services, and you still get a lot of benefits without having to put in the, you know, the very large investments. And so.
Mm-hmm. What are the main differences you see between maybe the Japanese ecosystem and the European one?
One, I think, easy one is like the US and Japan. You're talking about one country. In Europe, I don't even know how many. I I lost count, sorry, I've been away for too long. And in the regulations we talked about earlier in the previous panel, like there's the ESA way of doing things, the European Commission way of doing things, and every national country has their own way of procuring and doing things.
You think we need more harmonization on that level?
I'm afraid it will mean more paperwork. I think it just has to be simpler. Whatever simpler means, again, I think for a startup, if you're now competing with everybody else, in the world, you need to be faster, and being able to, to get there with fewer resources and less time. Europe doesn't have that reputation.
Omar, you also have a company based in Luxembourg, a successful one. What do you think? It's true that we ended the previous panel saying that Europe doesn't have a speed problem and we're fast enough. Do you think we are fast enough? Is it working?
No, it's working, yeah. Unfortunately, I think it's a problem, as Julien mentioned, like the regulation, access to capital, and we face this because we were, when I started 2016, we were the first one to think, how can we use cellular over satellite? We started in Luxembourg. I started in Luxembourg. I was about to go to the US, but there was this Lux Impulse program here. It was, at that time, all this space push in Luxembourg, so I said I'd start here. Years after, many other European US companies tried to do the same, but they got access to a lot of funding, and they start to move very fast, and it becomes very hard to compete. And now they are coming into the European market also. So why is that? And I think it's because, again, the lack to access to capital, the long process to get that capital. And I think one of the things I noticed also, this always, like the European institutes, they see the strategic importance. They have instruments. They see where this is going. They want to support companies. But there's always this, we have to make it with a venture capital. We have to match it. We have to go through a process. We are not the market experts. But then the decision becomes under someone else to decide, and that funding even starts going out to UK, US companies, not to the local ones. But why the European investors become also members of that committee to decide to invest strategically, because they are giving the money also. So we've seen, like, in some countries, directly investing into their companies or creating sovereign funds that directly invest, and they are moving very fast. In Europe, I mean, US is already like, you have a lot of venture capital risk. So this is actually a problem. And then you have, I think, there's a very good place now for early stage startups and good capital for that, but for scale-ups, there's a gap. We are a company now in the middle where you're not an early stage anymore, and every VC you speak to, they say we invest in early stage only, that's our mandate. And growth VCs, they are, we need like hundreds of millions or tens of millions of revenue, and you stand in the middle, and that's a gap. And we kept saying there's a gap, and you're gonna see a lot of companies moving from early stage to scale up, and then they stop here. And the trend we saw, they end up leaving to the US. That's what we saw.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a graph that was courtesy of SP, so thank you for sending this over, about an incoming wave of scale-ups in Europe notably, and how the funding might be shifting between early stage to scaling up. Mickaël, maybe from a more academic perspective, how do we turn startups into scale-ups?
That's a tricky question, but maybe I can come back to what was said, because for example, I run a master program in entrepreneurship and innovation, so I try to attract students from all around the world. So we have 40 students. They come from 25 different countries. And let me tell you this story. So one of my students has developed a platform. It's not about space industry, but about a medical platform to put together patients and doctors and so on. And it is super frustrating and discouraging for him to launch this platform here because of the regulation. So what he did, finally he has decided to launch it in Vietnam, the country he comes from, and then come back later here in Luxembourg because it takes so much time and it's complicated. So he is obliged to have this ambidextrous behavior to exploit an opportunity elsewhere and to explore here this opportunity, but it's much more complicated for him. So how we help startup to scale up? It's a very big question. So I think it has to be done at the meso level, at the ecosystem level. And this is what we do here, for example, at Luxembourg, also at the University of Luxembourg. We have Siva here, that is here from the incubator. So we really try to support startups from the beginning, because it's not so easy. We have these very clever people, expert, technical guys that are able to create something, invent something, but how we can go to the market. I'm not talking about scale-up, but only just finding the first customer. It's super hard. In the master program, we work with the SNT, Secure and Trust Interdisciplinary Center at the University of Luxembourg. There are super smart people here that create technologies for space industry. And they're working on it. And at one moment, they say, okay, but right now, to who I can sell this product or this solution? It's super hard to understand the value chain if you're not supported. So the idea is really to support them to find the relevant mentor as well, because not everyone can be the relevant mentor. I could support my student at the early stage, but afterwards, when they want to go in a specific sector, we need to find someone very relevant for them, for their activity, to support them, to help them to scale up. And then we have the question about how we can attract the funding. So that's sure that at the European level, we have a lot of funding, that's great, but it's not probably enough compared to what the US do or China does. It's 5 less time than what we have in the US. Okay, so about the private investment. So we do a lot of, we invest a lot of public money, especially in Luxembourg, for example. We are very good at the ecosystem level about the public infrastructure, public investment, but the tricky point is really to attract private investors. We do that more and more, but we are probably more efficient than the US investors. So probably we should work a lot about this point and be able also to attract them with probably fiscal policy that are very interesting also for them, to show what we do, to better communicate about it, and we will be able to support our startup and let them be able to scale up, probably.
Thank you. Jan, what is your point of view from Redwire, also based in Luxembourg, if I'm not mistaken?
I think the big challenges, as we already discussed, for small companies is definitely the rules and regulations. What we see also from the funding mechanisms is there are more and more funding mechanisms for all kinds of scales, but there are a lot of them. So there's a lot of competition as well. So just to keep track of the funding mechanisms and be in early discussions for those funding mechanisms to find the right consortium and so on, that all takes a lot of time. And often, of course, well-prepared entities which already have more experience, they are more equipped to also get those calls. So I think one challenge that we have is in Europe in general, the scale of the market. What we see, like globally speaking, if you look at the market where is currently the most money, it's telecom. And this is currently vertically integrated through SpaceX. So we have also, of course, now Blue Origin trying to enter into this market. And of course, also this is tricky to compete financially against entities that are vertically integrated. And I think what we're trying to do now is we try to finance infrastructure, but we don't have this kind of vertical integration, and we don't put the funds in to create this vertical integration, because we distribute the money a lot, which is important to build up the infrastructure. But if you look at the financing of the space sector, then the US is still investing 4 times more than Europe does. So it's very difficult to compete in this kind of situation. And I think what is important is to create a market, maybe first also artificially, unfortunately, so that we get those structures that later can sustain themselves. And I think everything that we do now, even like through the growth phase and the investment, is still probably not enough to compete against this like globally vertically integrated entities that are not sitting in Europe. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we will face. And I think also the other challenge is we try now to build up critical infrastructure, for example, with launchers and so on. But all of this money is not going into being more competitive. It's just to like keep up and having the same infrastructure. So I think we need to find a smart way in investing to key technologies in order to be competitive and like offer something else than what is already there and very cheaply available. Because you will.
Do you have an example?
You know, I think Europe has done a lot of developments in quantum tech. We have a lot of high-tech startups, and I think we need to focus more, as was already mentioned, on a global European strategy in order, like, where we want to kind of like be a key player, and not try to repeat things where other entities already like are very cheap, and try to like find a way on how we can incentivize competitiveness, not only here within the European market, but more like what can we offer to the global markets, and how can we, you know, reduce the boundaries to do so. For example, the biggest advantage from us to the US market is it's more easy to export our products than for the US, for example, because they have a lot of constraints to ITAR. So if we sell to other countries, to third countries, then that's way easier. We have a lower cost of labor, because practically the education is kind of like democratized in terms of costs here in Europe. That means we are able to give cheaper engineering services than the US, for example. And I think all of those things are really like key assets that we have that we need to leverage somehow. But of course, I don't have the solution for this. It's just the observations that
if you had a solution, we wouldn't be here debating about it. But some good points. There are indeed some strong opportunities in Europe. And I actually wanted to ask you, Omar, because you've managed to scale a company originally based in Europe, now global development. What's the recipe?
Well, I think
Omar, I'm sorry.
You can.
But feel free to share your recipe as well.
I think first the approach was focusing on being early, focusing on the market opportunities, going outside. Like we have 5 subsidiaries in Australia, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Greece, and in Africa and Rwanda. And this is where the market is. Funny enough, and coming back to the point you mentioned, I mean, like the US spends more. Indeed, it's difficult to compete, but at least let's serve first our market in Europe. We can't. The spectrum, if we look at our field, that was standardized for cellular communication over satellites, whether smart cars, mobile phones communicating to satellite, today in Europe is owned, given to 2 companies that are non-European, and we can't access it. Any European company now who tries like to connect cell phones or IoT devices over the S-band, by EU it's given to 2 companies that are non-European. It will expire in 2027. We'll see after. There was a consultation what to do with it, and we, as a lot of companies, said there should be other entrants. It's fine. Whatever services are there, and it's good to have competition, good to have companies offering services. But what is not right is warehousing assets or such a spectrum, or you know, not allowing innovative companies also to access it. And luckily, like some regulators understand that, and they did enable us with some restrictions to start offering some services in Europe. Sometimes we have to go ask permission from the non-European companies. Can we use that spectrum? Can we do it at night where we don't bother your services? But it's European spectrum. So I think before like we go out and serve markets, which the way which we did right now in other parts of the world, we have good capabilities in Europe. We should start serving our own market, you know, before someone else comes and serve it for us. And I think we have the capabilities, but that comes down to the decision makers, how to make that happen.
Thank you. I want to ask a next question to the audience, linked as well to Europe and its global positioning. Does Europe take enough entrepreneurial risks to compete with the US and China? Same possibilities, yes, no, it's more complicated than that. And I would like to hear from our panelists, but just the answer without actually adding upon it. Julien, do you think we'd take enough entrepreneurial risks? Yeah, think about it for 30 seconds. I'll go to Tomas then.
I mean, if I cannot really add any comments to it, I would say it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Because indeed, the US is one country, China is one country, Europe is not. If I can elaborate later, I will do it later.
Yeah, you will, don't worry. Jan, do you think?
I think no. just because the global environment shows us that we're not able to compete to some extent, like we're losing market. And I think that's an indicator that we're probably not risk-affine enough. But again, it might also be just the environment. So I think, yeah, it's a difficult question.
Omar.
I think it's complicated. As I said, there are efforts doing this, and there are still a lot to be done. Still, there's also external factors. I think there's still some time. More need to be done to position ourselves correctly, and harmonization, I think, among the different institutes and programs is also very important, so that like whatever good effort is done here is also synchronized with other efforts. I think that's.
How about you, Mickaël?
No, it was said before, so I think it's a problem of cultural mindset. So in general, not only in space sector, we take less risk than the risk we can take in the US. So, and we apply the same thing for the space sector and for other sectors where we are not really risk-oriented, which is very good for so many things. But what could be really a problem in entrepreneurship? Because we need to size or to create opportunities, up to you. And if we're not able to take risk and to put money on the table for that, we lose so many opportunities. And right now, with these reuse launchers or these kind of things, we are late. So we need to take more risk, for sure.
I think we're maybe in the worst case scenario where, from one hand, I would say there's a lot of entrepreneurs, even for the space industry, that want, to take risks, disrupt, and have their startup, be the leading company in one sector. But I think when I say worst case, is because those people don't have the support network, the ecosystem Omar mentioned. We mentioned the capital, all the stuff that would enable them to really be successful, because the mindset and everything else is not there to support them, so they go somewhere else. And you combine those two factors, I think the answer is no. But it's unfortunate because I think, I don't know, I would say 10 years ago, I would say that maybe this entrepreneurship spirit was not even that vibrant. I think we're feeling it more and more in space and everywhere else. And so there's a bit of a lost generation of those entrepreneurs, at least for the space sector, need to go somewhere else most of the time.
Most of the public seems to be saying no as well. We're not taking enough risks. And we've talked about in the panel beforehand the fact that maybe we need to change a bit the system so Europe is able to take more risks. I didn't not plan to ask this question, but I cannot help to see that in the previous panel, we kind of ended on the fact that Europe is moving fast enough, and of course there are many things that we're doing the right way. But then when I hear people from the industry, they don't seem to be as convinced that more efforts can be done. So Tomas, I want to ask you that question, because at Cassini, you've mentioned the mechanisms, you dialogue a lot between what's happening, for instance, the EU at ESA and what's happening in the industry. It seems that we have a problem of dialogue here where we don't agree with respect to our point of view.
I mean, indeed, the European Union and the European Space Agency are two different organizations. So it's indeed difficult to, or not difficult, but there are two maybe different priorities. There are indeed also two different sources of budget for space. Then indeed we also have the member states who have their own budget for space. So we can see that the budget in general is quite disparated across Europe. So that's, I would say, is already something vulnerable for Europe in comparison to US and China, because as I said, it's one country while Europe is not. The priorities may lay also differently. We know that ESA, as I think Paul was mentioning before, is more focused on the space exploration and these missions, while the European Union and the Commission are focusing more on the benefits on Earth. Indeed, with ESA, we also try to, let's say, complement each other. So even when it comes to Cassini, indeed, we have multiple, let's say, programs that I have mentioned a while ago. Indeed, we may not cover the whole life cycle of a company, but then we also know that ESA has multiple their services and programs they offer to companies. And indeed, it wouldn't make much sense for us to duplicate what ESA is already doing. So even though that we are two different organizations, and I know that for companies it may be very often difficult to navigate what is the difference, because then also in the Commission we have the European Union Agency for the Space Program, so that's another actor that comes to the play, and maybe even more confusing. But indeed we will try to find a common ground among the institutions to not duplicate the effort, not duplicate the money, and to really be a bit more helpful to the companies. Indeed in Cassini we always are happy to hear the feedback from the companies, how they perceive Cassini, how the programs that we offer, whether they are really targeting the challenges they are facing, and if, for example, the answer would be no, then we would indeed try to find a different way how to do it. But if I give you, for example, an example of the Business Accelerator and its success, we have started in 2023, and we have 2 batches a year, twice 20 companies. And for example, we had a look at the first 20 companies in 2023, and 1 year after the program, and on average, their customer revenue grew by 353%, which was around 153 million euro, which indeed we cannot say this is 100% thanks to Cassini Business Accelerator. But of course, if you compare the rate with which they have been growing before they participated in the Business Accelerator and the rate after, there is indeed a correlation that they really targeted well the challenges they were facing in the program, and we helped them to overcome this. So indeed, the budget indeed that we also have for space is not comparable to the one in the US. I think one of the reasons for that also may be that in Europe maybe space was not that much perceived as a priority. So many member states didn't perceive it as a strategic area, while some member states do, some do not. And indeed, the budget of the European Commission is a result of agreement between the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the member states. So there indeed is a bit more complicated for also us to compete on the same level, because we have 27 different member states that need to agree, let's say, on the common ground, and that indeed makes it a bit burdensome for us.
Mm-hmm. If I may follow up, what I want to put forward is we've heard kind of this message from maybe the European Commission or institutions in the previous panel that their point of view is that we're moving fast enough, and I have a feeling that the point of view of the industry is we're not moving fast enough. Do you think it's a problem of understanding each other's needs and constraints, or do you think overall we have an issue of speed and we need to go faster?
I think that there is always space for improvement in this perspective, but at the same time, the fact that we may not move as fast as other countries is also maybe the precision with which we're trying to define what we want to focus on. So I will again repeat what Paul said. We have the best navigation system in the world. It has the highest precision. Copernicus is also the, let's say, best Earth observation component in the world, which is something we need to be proud of. Indeed, it wasn't an easy way to get there. It maybe took us longer time than to the US, to China, but we can see the result that really the precision of GPS and Galileo is way more precise than GPS. So even though we may not be fast enough in some of these aspects, the eventual result may be of a higher quality and more impactful than of the other countries. Also, when we have a look at IRIS², which is currently under development, it should be a constellation of 290 satellites. There we also take into the consideration the sustainability aspect, where we do not want to send, for example, as SpaceX, thousands and thousands of satellites to LEO, where they survive a couple of years, and then we do a re-entry, we pollute the atmosphere, and we pollute the orbit. So we will take more aspects into consideration, which indeed causes also the delay. But then, as I said, the result eventually is of a high quality, it's a robust result, and I would say also more resilient, which also in the long-term perspective is playing a very crucial role.
I think we can all agree the European way is the high-quality way, for sure. If we go, maybe now dive a bit deeper into the way public-private partnership work and procurement. Maybe, Jan, I want to ask you this. What do you think makes a successful collaboration between your company and an institution, be it the European Commission, the European Union, or the European Space Agency?
Well, I think, to be honest, all the institutions that we've been collaborating so far, they always were really trying to be helpful and trying to support us. Of course, we have very good relations with the Luxembourg Space Agency, and I think what really helps here in Luxembourg is the short ways of communication. That means you can, if you have any issues, can easily find a person that actually can help you. On the same side, for example, we get informed about specific activities that might be of interest for us, and that really helps us. If you're looking more on the European scale, there are of course so many funding mechanisms, as I already mentioned, so many ITTs open that you need to really spend a dedicated effort to keep track there, and the ecosystem is so vast that like finding the right people that are responsible for things is very difficult. So to give you a concrete example, I was trying to discuss some awesome activities with ESA, and I found actually 2 people at ESA to speak about this that didn't know of each other, which work exactly on the same topics. And this is something that is, of course, strange, but it's also understandable because the infrastructure is also large. And I think what always helps is like finding an easy path for a point of contact to discuss those things, and being involved getting involved from institutions also to educate companies about those opportunities. I think that's really what helps us.
How about you, Julien? Do you have experience with the procurement process in Europe?
Yes, I'm still thinking about the previous question. I didn't ask the opinion of industry on
Oh, you can.
the speed aspect.
Go for it.
And you said, in Europe, emphasis on quality, which is a good thing. But I think the case of Galileo and GPS is interesting because we have the exact same thing going on right now with Starlink. I don't know how early GPS was compared to Galileo, maybe a decade or 2, something like that. Yeah, and so if we look forward, I'm confident in Europe we can deploy a constellation that's better than Starlink. In the meantime, for a decade or 2, conflict in Ukraine or wherever, we're using Starlink. And so I think that stresses the need for speed and velocity. Yes, quality is great, but we have huge gaps today with Starlink. We've launched a number of our aspects where it's very critical.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't agree with the consensus or the conclusion of the previous panel on that point. Not as iSpace, as a just concerned European citizen. Procurement now as iSpace. We're in just going through that right now actually, and I think what I find interesting in our procurement discussions is how to tackle risk sharing, because entities in Europe see what we can offer, so we can offer a cheaper way to get to the moon in our case, and the reason why we can get a cheaper way to go to the moon is as I said earlier, huge financial backing from investors who covered a lot of the non-recurring costs R&D, and B, we cut corners. We're here to find the right corners to cut so that at the end of the day it's still going to work, but it's going to be faster and cheaper than if we went again high quality. But that means we take more risk on the service delivery at the end, and from the very time of the contract signature, like both parties have to agree that risk posture, we're on the same page. Right? We have to shake hands that yes, you're getting this price because we're taking more risk, and therefore if things don't pan out the way we both hope to, we also need to share the consequence of that. And that's a very difficult discussion to be had in the context of, I'll say ESA for now, procurements where your technical team, your project team is fully aligned. They want to change things and they want to go service and they want to go new space and risk. But your contract discussions are with the procurement team, completely other branch of ESA, whose incentives and imperatives are vastly different. And even within the agency, we can feel I don't want to say tension, but how do we make this work right? We want to do this, but our procurement rules are such, and they're not always tailor-made to address issues like risk sharing, which can be in milestone payment plans, which can be with incentive, with penalties, a lot of things. But there's talking about time. This takes a humongous amount of time to go through all those possible ways in which we could risk, we share the risk on a given project.
Yeah, because we're talking about speed, but maybe one of the concrete applications to try to go faster is just to improve our procurement, generally speaking.
Yeah, we're starting a one now because we were told, well, if we don't speed up, it's going to take a year to sign the contract. That's a long time for a small company.
Yeah. Omar, do you have an insight for us on that topic?
It's a very interesting topic, yeah, and we've been through all this together. I've seen over the years, like from when it started till now, a lot of optimization took place, whether it's on ESA side or on program side. Of course, like government support, Luxembourg Space Agency have been always very entrepreneurial and supportive. But of course, when there's a process and processes can always have to follow the rules. But I see a lot of relaxation. I was very impressed with the European Innovation Council, EIC Accelerator, like the grants that we got, that it went so quickly. They relaxed a lot of the rules, and I think this is a very good case if I compare to other programs, because we won the grant where here's the contract, 2 milestones, we meet later and deliver what we agreed on. That's it. We're not going to do endless documentation and back and forth and diligence. Make it work. And I think this is very good for companies to work. What I would have always hoped is, like for startups, like as a government or institute or agency, funding them should not be just for R&D purpose. It should be measured by business KPIs for business purpose, because of course, developing technology and R&D is important, but startups are not universities, and they are not here to develop technology for purpose of technology. They are here to sell. So the decision on giving them funding and growing them should be based also not just on technical capabilities, but on business capabilities to support them. And I think this is something still needs to be worked on and developed, because I mean, that decision has been always deferred to investors and venture capitals, even if governments are limited partners in these venture capitals. But then if a startup spends so long time and money to develop technology, but then when it reaches a stage for business, it has to go get the money from a different source, they would start measuring you on business capability. But the money you got at the beginning had to be spent only on R&D, no business. You cannot use the money to hire business people or do sales or things like. You have to develop only technology with it. Okay, but by that time, competitors moved on. And so I think there should be more focus on business aspects and KPIs, even with government money given to startups or agencies money. There should be trust, also mutual trust with the startups. And as again, I see the EIB, I see doing great job in this. I see like in the recent years that moved very fast. And I hope we're also part of the CASSINI program, by the way. So a lot of European instruments supporting companies, but there's always this, you have to have that private part support or that local country part support also, which needs to go together always. So I'm talking on the commercial side, not the R&D or technical side. I mean, in the end, I mean, in an ideal world, they'll say, okay, startup, you receive from early stage the money, whether you use it to develop technology. I want in the end to see business results. Go and do it and come back to me after time, so we meet, we see what happened. But too much control, too much checks, too much milestones, and this delays startups. By that time, competitors would have moved on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this insight. And this also brings us back, I feel, to the conversation we've had on regulation in the first panel and how to make it as easy as possible for companies to remain competitive. We'll now be moving on to our last theme of the panel, which is more related to one thing we said we're already pretty good at, which is skills, talent, and workforce development in Europe. So our next question for the audience is, what should Europe prioritize to build a strong space workforce? So you can prioritize the different statement between early STEM education, university, industry integration, global talent attraction, and technical upskilling to what you think is the most relevant between number 1 to number 4. And in the meantime, while you're doing it, I want to ask the question, of course, to our professor on the panel, Mickaël. What new skills do you think universities and training programs should focus on to prepare students for the space sector of 2030?
It is also a tricky question. We did a research some years ago with my PhD student on talent management in space industry in Luxembourg. So she met 40 startups, and she talked to them, and she asked them, okay, what is a talent for you? First question, which is absolutely super difficult to answer. What is a talent, actually? I don't know. Actually, after having read so many papers, it's super complicated. And what we show in this paper is that for big firms, for example, for SES in Luxembourg, okay, and for the startups, it's not the same definition. And so it's not the same talent management practices that occur, actually, that happen. And if you are SES or let's say Astrium or TAS for France, for the French situation, okay, so you have money to plan to develop programs, for example. Whereas when you are a startup, especially at the beginning of your story, you don't have money, and you rely on people. So you cannot send them in training, so you give them autonomy, and so you do with what you have. And it's super difficult also to attract people. So how do you do that? So you are obliged to find a bricolage strategy to encourage them, to onboard them, give them some autonomy on projects, and you have to be also proactive about the future skills that will be required. But it is super complicated because right now you have a skill gap, and you have to solve this skill gap right now. You are not here to think about that. So if you are SES, yes, of course, you can think about the 3 next year or 5 next years and what will be the skills that we want. But if you are a startup at the beginning of the process, it's super hard to think about that. But we encourage them at the end of the paper to think proactively about what will be the next skill that you need, and maybe to focus on people with entrepreneurial behaviors. Because in general, we need 2 types of skills: the technical skills, so we are looking for experts, and also the people that are able to become leader later. It's not always the same people. And so if you are a startup, okay, so you are trying to find someone who is an expert, who adhere to your vision and your dream, because you don't have so much money to pay him or to pay her, and you try to manage this person by letting her autonomy, by try to create a real pleasure by being here and work here, and you try to also to develop these skills in a much more informal way. And this is why I'm so admirative about entrepreneurs, because they're able to do so many things: run the business, develop the technology, and also manage people. So yes, to answer your question, yes, technical skills, leadership skills, but depending on the size of the company, it's more or less difficult to be able to achieve this objective.
We've talked about in the previous panel maybe the fact to integrate something around space law to train future engineers and entrepreneurs. Do you think it's a good idea?
Yes. It's good. It could, I think, but we have to align our practices at the macro level, meso level, and micro level. Okay, what do we want to do? For example, just something different, but I'm very fan of Luxembourg. I'm French. When I arrived here, I was so impressed by the fact that this country is run like a SME, but with a lot of flexibility. And for example, they have identified that in the rankings, international rankings, we were not so good about the entrepreneurship spirit. What did they do? They support different initiatives, for example, Young Entrepreneur, to develop this entrepreneurial mindset. And right now, we see more and more Luxembourgish young people that are okay to launch their business, which was not less the case 10 years ago or 20 years ago, according to my Luxembourgish colleagues. Okay, so when we are able also to develop this mindset, we can see the fruits, but in 3, 4, 5, 10 years. So I think we can, yes, integrate something about space law, but whatever. Also encouraging also women, for example, to go to this industry. It's still male dominating. But if we just use our AI algorithm, the guys will see opportunities in space industry and the ladies will not. So we have to pay attention to that also, so to encourage them to, when we are, for example, if we are, I'm running a master program, so I changed the maquettes and brochure a long time ago. I put women on it. There were only men, just to change the mindset. So if we have more women, for example, also, for sure we can also improve our capacity to reach out some skills that will be demanded at this moment.
Well, when I look at this panel, I can only agree with you. Julien, you were smiling on the space law aspect. Do you think we should integrate space law?
I was smiling because a thought that came to mind in the previous panel was how it seems for once as Europeans we encounter a problem, the first reaction is to create a regulation to deal with it. And in the case of sustainability and things like this, I think the problem is there, but I still question the fact whether a space law is the way to deal with it, or whether it's just yet again reinforcing the stereotypes seen by other nations that Europe expertise is in regulation, but then what is the actual positive influence of that on the other countries? So you were mentioning the space law for education and talent improvement in space. To me, echoes that, is that yes, we need more gender diversity. I think also a lot of more in-house talent in Europe for space, but STEM in general. I doubt a regulation is going to be the way to fix this. And I think Luxembourg is very interesting. I think another gap Luxembourg identified is the lack of education system for space. So they created a space master's also in the wake of the Space Resources Initiative of 2016, which is working well. But also Luxembourg is very welcoming of global talent. I mean, from we went from 0 to roughly 50 here in Luxembourg, and very quickly we had 20 nationalities. Today I think we have 36 out of 50 people. I don't think you'd get that level of diversity anywhere else in Europe, or for that outside of Europe as well. So I think it's very specific of Luxembourg, and I see it as a very long-term benefit also for the country, that we attracted this talent from the Philippines, from Colombia, wherever. They sometimes bring their family, and the spouse, male or female, creates their own business or his own business, and there's a lot of ripple effects just from attracting all this talent from abroad. And even if they no longer work for iSpace, they'll stay and do something else, more startups, more entrepreneurship. So I think that's a very the value of all this is a big positive for Luxembourg and Europe in general.
Thank you, Julien. We'll maybe come back on the sustainability topic during the Q&A. But to finish on the skills development, I want to ask you, Jan, do you find the talent that you need at Redwire, or do you identify some gaps?
Well, I think it's always difficult to find very experienced people in space, because typically they earn well and they are less likely to move once they are above the 30s. So I think it's always a challenge to attract senior talent. I think what we see also with the interaction and our collaboration with the University of Luxembourg is that this allows us really to source talent. So there's a lot of R&D researchers that are really highly qualified and are ambitious, and of course that helps us to really find experts as well. I think in general it's always tricky to find the right person for the right job, especially if you're a smaller entity, because you want to have maybe someone who is versatile but still has like a specialization. So it's always like you find the needle in the haystack, and that's always a bit tricky. But I think in general we see in Luxembourg as well, through to those programs, that there are more and more people available, and I think also more talent is attracted to Luxembourg through all of this startup scene. And of course we see that people move between companies, and that creates also an experience in the ecosystem that is kind of like traversing companies, and that helps us in total to improve our let's say business performance. And I think that's great for what I would hope the students would learn, because we had the discussion about abilities, and I think with you know, the AI disruption, no one's really knowing what we'll need in 10 years. I think what is important is, I think, to also be able to cope with situations that are uncomfortable. So I think this idea of moving between countries and, you know, experiencing different environments, I think that's something very valuable, because it allows you to yeah, get out of your comfort zone. You need to acquire new skills, maybe, you know, get to know new environments. So I think that's something that is always valuable. And I think that this ability to adapt will be more and more important also in the future, because it's clear that we will probably not have jobs that are the same like for 40 years or 50 years as it was in the past, but we're adapting and like trying to fill the needs that are upcoming. And there's a lot of opportunity in this as well. So I really see this not negative, but in a positive way. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. We're arriving at the end. I want to leave the last word to Thomas, but before, if you want to think of some of the questions that you have for the last 10 minutes. Thomas, we've talked about workforce development. Do you think there is a European way to attract talent and maybe as well foster this mobility Jan was mentioning?
I mean, for the mobility, we have the, let's say, the most well-known tool in the European Union, which is the Erasmus+. Indeed, many people would say it targets only students, which is not entirely true. It also targets people into productive age. You can be a teacher, you can be a researcher, you can have the opportunity to get a funded, let's say, exchange stay anywhere across Europe to really gain new experience. Another, maybe less well-known program is Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, which targets researchers. It also funds them to, again, travel all over Europe to conduct their research at a very high level. And also what we have, one of the projects in DG DEFIS actually is a platform called Space Career Launchpad. It's a platform where we mainly list, as of now, internships and fresh or young graduates opportunities. So we really try to attract the young talent to focus on space. And there we also try to, for example, put testimonial videos of people who indeed are even non-European and that came to Europe and found a job here in the space industry. So with this, we also try to incentivize people to do so. But also I would maybe like to mention that indeed we have some pressuring shortages in skilled workforce, and indeed we need to solve them quickly. So let's say, of course, we need to do some technical upskilling, etc. But I think we really need to think also in the long-term perspective, because nowadays we have maybe some shortages, but I think the demographic challenges of the space sector are particularly, let's say, challenging and will be very challenging in 10 to 15 years, because the average age in the space sector is relatively high. And once those people will start retiring, there's going to be a very big exodus of those people from the sector. And that's why we need to make sure that already now we start really sparking the interest in space and STEM-related subjects among kids, let it be primary school, secondary school, teenagers, and of course we need to make sure that there are relevant studying programs at universities that people can study, where indeed the cooperation between academia and industry is very crucial, because it's the industry that needs to say what do they need. And the academia needs to reflect this in the programs and to be also flexible enough to, let's say, update the curricula respectively to what the industry needs. Indeed, space is a very rapidly evolving area, so it may be very challenging as well for the academia, but I think the very close cooperation is crucial. And then indeed we have the people in productive age who needs to be constantly upgrading their skills, so the upskilling. Then of course we may have the time when people from automotive will start moving to other high-tech industries, be it space or defense, and we also need to make sure that they have the means to do it. They have maybe the courses or any transitional courses or opportunities to really change the environment. So I think I would put real emphasis on the fact that we need to cover the whole lifespan and not to focus only on the short-term goals, but really to think in the long-term way, because that could be indeed one of the big issues. And the last point on attracting global talent, the European Commission recently launched an initiative called Choose Europe. And with this initiative, we also try to attract the non-European talent, where we try to really emphasize the benefits of being in Europe, be it freedom of science, be it indeed the accessible healthcare, educational system, or the social security, which indeed is, let's say, the strength of Europe. So this I would also highlight that we try to do when it comes to the global talent.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I was just checking the questions because we've had the question from the previous panels, but I found the question for this one. So to close on the topic of workforce development and what the Europe is currently doing, I noted that you came up with this question of still the need to dialogue between what the industry needs and what academia can propose, which I think is a recurring topic in this morning panels. The first question that we have, however, is more on the social media, and what is your opinion about the impact of social media on the creation of companies, startups, and the entrepreneurial mindset? I guess a question for our CEOs, or do you use social media?
Yeah, we do a lot actually, but we notice like some patterns, like LinkedIn, I think is very powerful tool. Twitter, I don't know, it's more, I've seen like in the US is mostly used between space companies. Here, at least our experience hasn't been as big as in LinkedIn, and in Instagram also we try, but it's very minimal. I mean, I think it's, yeah, space is a bit, probably if you put more effort on it, we can reach out, but it's mainly for consumers, and yeah, it's not for businesses.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Julien? Do you think it has an impact, social media, on the creation of companies? More people want to launch their businesses?
No, I will answer the question maybe in a different angle,
Yeah.
going back to AI and the bias.
Yeah.
What I see is maybe a bias in social media in establishing the persona of the entrepreneur to be equal to, our billionaires in the US. That seems to be the image everybody has about like a space entrepreneurs. There's going to be your Elon Musk, your Jeff Bezos, and so on. I think there would be benefits for balancing that with more, let's say, regular folks, regular entrepreneurs. In our case, for iSpace, our CEO started 15 years ago, and he's just a regular guy with a crazy dream, and it took him 15 years to get there. Very humble, very approachable, and not a billionaire, not yet. I don't want to talk for Omar, but I mean, if we had those profiles more prevalent, I think it might actually inspire the next generation a lot more than we're currently being inspired by these billionaires, and also putting more light on, Barbara from Interstellar, LAMAMY from the Exploration Company. I mean, there's Thrust Me also, there's a lot of, very interesting female entrepreneur CEOs in space that would deserve, I think, a larger share of the attention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Or Thomas, you wanted to mention. Let's move on then to the next question, since we have 5 minutes left. We want to attract non-EU talents, but the militarization of space makes it difficult to hire them. What can be done? I'm guessing, Thomas, that's a question more for you.
I mean, indeed, I know this is a topic that also my colleagues in defense units are struggling a bit with, because indeed the mobility in space is one thing. There are not that many restrictions. Defense is indeed way more sensitive area, where people need to have the security clearances. Unless you're an EU citizen, the EU country would not really grant you the security clearance, which indeed is very burdensome. At the same time, I mean, space is dual use by nature, so almost every single technology can be used for both. That's unquestionable. but we still have many companies that indeed focus purely on the, for the civilian purposes and not really the defense or security related. So I think there is not really a very easy answer to that, because indeed, as I said, the defense and security are very sensitive topics. But again, space is definitely dual use, but many of those companies keep focusing on the civilian aspect, which I believe should be hopefully sufficient for attracting the talent.
My answer is come work for iSpace.
Come work for iSpace if you are a student coming from the EU. Okay, the next question. Apparently those were the questions that we had, but we don't have any more. So I think we're going to come to the end of the panel. Thank you so much for joining, to all of our panelists. It was a pleasure to discuss space entrepreneurship with you. We know we all have very busy schedule, but if you want to hang around, we're going to have a lunch break happening right now, and then we'll go back into discussions on UNIVERSEH and more university focused. Thank you for joining us online or here.